I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tonga to introduce an address by the head of government.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, I have the distinct honor and privilege to introduce the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Tonga, the Honorable Reverend Dr. Pohiva Tu'i'onetoa, to present Tonga's national statement via a video recorded format to the General Assembly of the United Nations on this general debate today. I thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, it has been over a year and a half from when the COVID-19 was declared a pandemic, disrupting the flow of economies and social infrastructure worldwide. But it is by God's grace that the Kingdom of Tonga remains COVID-19 free. And while so many lives have been claimed in the wake of this pandemic, Tonga commits to multilateralism, thereby supporting the theme for this session as introduced by Your Excellency as President of the General Assembly for the 76th session entitled Building Resilience Through Hope to Recover from COVID-19, Rebuild Sustainably, Respond to the Needs of the Planet, Respect the Rights of People, and Revitalize the United Nations. On that note, I congratulate Your Excellency on the assumption of your presidency at the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly and assure you of our full support throughout this session. I express our gratitude to your predecessor, His Excellency, Mr. Volkan Poskier, in successfully spearheading the 75th session of the General Assembly during the unprecedented and most difficult times. I congratulate His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, on his reappointment as Secretary General of the United Nations to a second term and commend his leadership in navigating the operation of the United Nations under the undesirable circumstances of the pandemic. Mr. President, I express our sincere condolences and solidarity with all member states afflicted in the loss of lives due to the pandemic while confronted by natural disasters and other tragedies. While Tonga remains COVID-19 free, we have not been spared from the socio-economic consequences thereof, worsened by an already dire economic situation facing many of our small island developing states as ideas. Tonga is fortunate to be the third country in the Pacific to receive the COVID-19 vaccine doses in March 2021 through the COVAX facility. To date, approximately 1/3 of the population have been vaccinated, and Tonga claims to vaccinate up to 70% of the population by end of 2021. Accordingly, Tonga joins other leaders in calling for timely and equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. Tonga supports to strengthen regional and global early pandemic and disaster planning and resilience building efforts. I express our sincere gratitude to all development partners, including the governments of New Zealand, Australia, China, Japan, United States of America, India, United Arab Emirates, to name a few, and to international organizations, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, CEPI, Asian Development Bank, and the World Bank for their most generous financial and humanitarian assistance through the COVAX facility, which have facilitated Tonga's response to remain vigilant amidst this global pandemic. Mr. President, in the light of the continued COVID-19, the fourth session of the Intergovernmental Conference of the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Marine Biological Diversity and Areas of Beyond National Jurisdiction, PB&J, has been further postponed to 2022. The progress of PB&J work through dialogue on relevant topics is well underway. Tonga is grateful for the commitment by the International Seabed Authority, ISA, to further building the capacity of developing states through the recent workshop of the Equitable Initiative Project, which was jointly organized by the ISA and the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs in July 2021, in cooperation with the Cook Islands, who hosted the workshop, and with the support of the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, NORAD. Tonga looks forward to hosting the final workshop of the Equitable Initiative Project later this year. Mr. President, Tonga, along with other leaders of the Pacific Islands Forum, at the 51st Forum Leaders Meeting recently held on 6 August 2021, reaffirmed that climate change is the single greatest threat facing the Blue Pacific, while recommitting to the goals enshrined in the Paris Agreement. Tonga has been ranked by the World Risk Report 2017 as the second most at-risk country in the world to natural disasters such as cyclones, flooding, and sea level rise. While Tonga contributes to a negligible amount of global greenhouse gas emission, we are ambitious in supporting the goal of limiting global warming through the submission of our second nationally determined contribution NDC in 2020, and in line with the timeline under the Paris Agreement. Tonga also launched the Tonga Energy Efficiency Master Plan for 2020-2030 and the National Certificate of Sustainable Energy, which clearly stated our determination to achieving a sustainable energy future while mitigating the effects of climate change. Mr. President, Tonga had the honor of co-chairing the 21st meeting of the United Nations Open-Ended Informal Consultative Process on Oceans and the Law of the Sea with the Principality of Monaco from 14 to 18 June 2021, focusing the discussion on the sea level rise and its impacts. This is very critical and a timely topic for Tonga, with the need for accelerated action to slow the rate of increase in sea level rise. Our Pacific Islands Forum leaders continue to note with grave concern the threat posed by sea level rise to our Blue Pacific, and are committed to ensuring the maritime zones of Pacific member states are delineated in accordance with the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UN clause, which should not be silenced due to climate change-related sea level rise. The Pacific Islands Forum leaders supported the development of a draft declaration on preserving maritime zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. The sixth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, provides the most up-to-date physical understanding of the climate change system and climate change, for which it's made a clear call in their comprehensive assessment report on the ocean for the ocean action to prioritize adaptation and mitigation measures. The 2021 IPCC report alluded to global mean sea level keeps rising even in the lowest scenarios of low emissions. However, should countries fail to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it is highly likely that this will result in an increase on the average of sea level 5 times. That is low emission, and it's not an option specifically for Tonga and the low-lying small island states in the Pacific. The Pacific region, because of its peculiar setting of low-lying small island states and atoll, is unfortunately experiencing sea level rise at a faster rate, to which are most vulnerable to. The impacts of which are set to hinder the progress of achieving Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. Mr. President, Tonga calls on major gas emitters to urgently commit to stronger climate action through robust strategies to achieving a net zero carbon by 2050. The commitments already made by leading countries to curb greenhouse gas emissions are most welcome and held in high regard. We look forward to participating in the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties, COP26, in Glasgow, United Kingdom, from 31st October to 12th November 2021, with the view of accelerating action towards achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. Mr. President, the Secretary General's report on developments and issues relating to ocean affairs and the law of the sea addresses the continued importance of the blue economy. The sustainable use of the ocean's resources and preserving the health of ocean ecosystems are critical, given the strong linkages between the people of the Pacific region and the ocean, for which they rely upon for their livelihood. The declining health of oceans due to the considerable amount of living coral lost, overfishing, growing number of ocean acidification, and the problem of marine plastic pollution poses great risk to our food security, livelihoods, and the environment. It is therefore urgent for us to call on others to assist in reversing the declining trend affecting the ocean as our traditional provider and to achieve the ocean-related sustainable development goals and the implementation of the Samoa pathway. We like to stress the need for urgent action to addressing sustainable livelihoods while upholding the legal framework as set out under the UN clause. Mr. President, it is very disheartening to see the global pandemic, now entering the second year, has caused major disruption in the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. On that note, we are grateful for the positive engagements thus far with the United Nations Office of High Representatives for least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states, the World Health Organization, the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs, the UNDP, the UNSCAP, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the United Nations Resident Coordinator in the Pacific, non-government organization, civil society organization, and the development partners. I acknowledge with gratitude the successful completion of the term of employment for Mrs. Whekitamoeloa Katoa Utoikamano as Under-Secretary General and High Representative for the least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. The opportunity afforded to one of our very own from Tonga and the Pacific, considering the underrepresentation of our country in the Pacific at the higher rank of the United Nations, is deeply valued. Mr. President, I conclude by reaffirming our commitment to sustainable development and resilience through multilateralism, recognizing the Asian call for action in response to nature and the environment while being mindful of what humankind so deserve. And with hope and determination, a more secure and durable future is envisaged through creative partnership and peaceful cooperation. I thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and Minister of Public Enterprises of the Kingdom of Tonga for the statement just made.